At the beginning of the story, the mother said goodbye to her 4 sons and daughters at a station. The time was during the Second World War, and the mother was worried about her 4 children and sent them to safety for a while. All 4 siblings didn't want to be separated from their mother, but they said goodbye to their mother for having no other choices and then came with the train. When they arrived in a forest, they got off the train and went to the house where they were going to stay in a horse-drawn carriage. Not long after, they arrived at Professor Kirk's house, and the lady who brought them in a horse-drawn carriage told them the rules and regulations of the mansion that they had to follow. The rules to follow were not to shout, not to make any noise at the dining table, and not to touch and use the historical antiques in this house without their permission. Among the names of the 4 siblings, the older brother and sister were Peter and Susan, while the younger brother and sister were named Edmund and Lucy. In the morning, the 4 of them were playing hide-and-seek while Susan hid in a box, Edmund hid behind the curtain, and Lucy came to a room looking for a place to hide. There was a large wardrobe covered with curtains in the room, and Lucy decided to hide in it. When Lucy entered the wardrobe, she unexpectedly came to a snowy world, and while exploring the snowy forest, she came to a lamp post. She turned around when she heard someone walking. It was a fawn, and they both started to see each other and got scared. Lucy introduced herself first, and the fawn asked if she was a beardless dwarf, as he had never seen Lucy before. Lucy replied that she was not a dwarf and that she was a girl, but the fawn didn't seem to understand what she was saying and asked if she was Eve's daughter. Then the fawn realized that Lucy was a human and asked what a human was doing to Narnia. The fawn introduced Lucy to his name, Tumnus, and they became friends with each other. Then Tumnus took Lucy to his house, and Lucy asked if they didn't have Christmas in this snowy winter. Tumnus replied that it had been over 100 years since Christmas had been celebrated in their kingdom and asked Lucy if she would like to hear a song. When Lucy replied that she wanted to listen, Tumnus played the flute and entertained Lucy. The flames danced in human form with the sound of the flute, and Lucy fell asleep. When Lucy woke up, it was late at night, and she prepared to go home, but Tumnus refused to let Lucy go home and told her that he had kidnapped her. He then explained that the kingdom they lived in was ruled by a white witch, that her magical powers had made Narnia winter all the time, and that the witch had ordered them to turn over to her if humans invaded their kingdom. But Tumnus changed his mind, and instead of handing Lucy over to the white witch, he took her to the forest and sent her home. Lucy said farewell to Mr. Tumnus and came out of the wardrobe. Lucy explained to her siblings that she went into the wardrobe and into a magical, snowy world, but no one believed her. One night, Lucy went into the wardrobe again, and Edmund came with her. While searching for Lucy in the forest, a horse-drawn carriage approached him, and an old dwarf began to hit him with a whip. The old dwarf was about to kill Edmund, and he was stopped by a woman in a white dress who asked Edmund what his name was. Edmund replied that his name was Edmund and that he had come to this forest to find his sister. The woman asked him how many brothers and sisters he had, and Edmund replied that he had 4. Edmund told her about his sister Lucy visiting a faun named Mr. Tumnus who lived in this forest. The lady in the white dress invited Edmund to the horse carriage and welcomed him with her food. The old lady told Edmund to bring the rest of the siblings to visit her and told him that she was the queen who ruled Narnia but had no son or daughter to inherit and that she would give Edmund the kingship if he wanted. Edmund promised to bring the rest of his siblings to her, and the woman showed him where she lived and left in a horse-drawn carriage. Soon the 2 siblings met again, and Lucy asked if he had met the white witch in the forest. Edmund pretended not to know, and before long they were back out of the wardrobe. When Lucy came back outside, she explained to Peter and Susan that she and Edmund had visited the magical world behind the wardrobe, but Edmund pretended not to know, saying that Lucy was only imagining what she was saying. The next day, while the 4 siblings were playing, Edmund accidentally broke the window pane. The 4 siblings were afraid that the professor would punish them, so they hid in the wardrobe and came to the snowy forest again. By that time, they were convinced that Lucy's words were true, and Peter told Edmund to apologize for lying to Lucy. When the 4 of them arrived at Mr. Tumnus' home, the door was damaged, and when they entered the house, Mr. Tumnus was nowhere to be found. All the things in the house were cracked and broken, and on the wall was a letter written about Mr. Tumnus joining the humans and being arrested and punished for opposing Narnia's queen. Just like that, the group came out of the cave and met a beaver that could talk to people, and Mr. Beaver asked them if they were friends of Mr. Tumnus. When Lucy answered yes, Mr. Beaver handed the handkerchief that Lucy had given Mr. Tumnus back to Lucy and told them to follow him. Mr. Beaver led them to a cave, where his wife saw Lucy and her siblings and warmly welcomed them with joy. As they discussed how to save Mr. Tumnus from the White Witch, Mr. Beaver said that there was only Aslan in their kingdom who could match the witch's magical powers. Edmund asked who Aslan was, and Mr. Beaver replied that he was the real king of the forest where they lived and that the witch was trying to take over Narnia by unfair means. Then Mr. Beaver told them about Aslan waiting around the stone table for the 2 sons of Adam and the 2 daughters of Eve to attack the witch's evil army and a prophecy that they all believed. that prophecy was that when Adam's flesh and bones sat on the throne at Cair Paravel, all of Narnia's bad fortunes would disappear. Susan and Peter said that they couldn't fight the White Witch because they were not heroes, refused to save Narnia, and prepared to go home. But they didn't see Edmund by their side. In fact, Edmund betrayed the siblings and went alone to the castle where the White Witch lived. Peter and his siblings realized that Edmund had gone to the witch and quickly tried to stop them. But before they had time, Edmund had already reached the witch's castle. Peter and Susan tried to rescue his brother from the witch, but Mr. Beaver stopped them, explaining that if they all entered the castle, the witch would kill them all. Mr. Beaver advised them to form an alliance with Aslan because it was only Aslan who could save their brother. Just like that, Peter and Susan had no choice but to join forces with Aslan to fight and defeat the White Witch. On the other hand, when Edmund entered the castle where the White Witch lived, he first saw many stone statues, and a wolf tried to attack him, but Edmund explained that he was the witch's special guest, and the wolf took him to the witch. The witch was angry that Edmund didn't bring Lucy and his siblings and planned to kill him. The White Witch ordered her subordinate Edmund to be locked up in a cage instead of killing him, and she tasked her disciple, the wolf Maugrim, with being captured and brought to Lucy's group. Maugrim called his friends and began to leave the castle to capture Lucy's group as per the witch's orders. Mr. Beaver and his wife were already preparing to run away, knowing that the witch's disciples, the wolves, would soon come to them. When the wolves destroyed the entrance doors and entered, they couldn't find Lucy's group, but while looking around, a wolf found an underground tunnel through which they escaped. On the other hand, Lucy's group ran along the underground tunnel and entered. Finally arriving outside the tunnel, they blocked the entrance of the tunnel with a can so that the wolves couldn't follow them, and when they got outside, they unexpectedly saw a fox. But this fox was not a subordinate of the witch. When the wolves came out of the tunnel, Lucy and the group climbed a tree and hid for a while. The fox pretended not to know, and the wolves bit him, and they left to find Lucy's group elsewhere. When they saw no more wolves around, they came back down the tree, and the two beavers healed the fox's wounds. In fact, this fox was none other than Aslan's disciple, whom they all wanted to meet and who was gathering an army of soldiers to fight against the White Witch. On the other hand, Edmund met Mr. Tumnus in the prison, and Mr. Tumnus immediately recognized him as Lucy's brother without even needing to be introduced. While Mr. Tumnus and Edmund were talking, the White Witch arrived and was quite angry that her soldiers hadn't found Lucy's group. When the witch tried to turn Edmund into stone with her magic, Edmund, as usual, feared the witch and revealed the secrets he knew. Lucy and her group were planning to join forces with Aslan to fight against the witch. The witch, instead of killing Edmund, led Mr. Tumnus out of her prison and transformed into a stone statue, leaving the castle to find Lucy and her siblings herself. On the other hand, the two beavers took Lucy and her 4 siblings as guides to Aslan's place, and to go to Aslan's camp, they had to cross a wide frozen river. As the group crossed the frozen river, a horse-drawn carriage followed them, and Lucy and the group thought the White Witch was following them, so they hid in a tunnel for a while. After a while, just as the witch was about to leave, they looked outside and saw that it wasn't the witch's carriage that was following them, but Santa Claus, known as Father Christmas, gave Christmas presents to them. Father Christmas gave Lucy the liquid of the flame flower as a gift, and this liquid could cure any kind of injury just by drinking a drop. Lucy was given a sword as a gift, and Suzanne was given a bow and many arrows as a gift. Then a magical horn was given out as a gift, and she was advised to blow the horn when she needed help. Father Christmas gave Peter a sword and a shield as a present and gave all the gifts until no one was left, then said goodbye to Lucy's group and left in the horse-drawn carriage. When they arrived at a certain place, they saw that the previously frozen and ice-like area was gradually melting and turning into a big river. As the group prepared to cross the river, the witch's disciples, the wolves, arrived and blocked all their paths to prevent them from escaping. A wolf captured Mr. Beaver, and the leader wolf told Peter and the group to surrender without fighting back. Peter realized that the mountain of snow next to them was about to collapse soon, so he cut the ice beneath their feet with his knife and began to leave with the flow. At one point, they climbed back ashore and continued their journey to the forest, where Aslan was. On the other hand, the wolves captured the little fox who betrayed their group, and the witch planned to turn the fox into stone. So Edmund told them where Aslan was and planned to stop the witch. But the witch turned the little fox into stone right in front of Edmund. On the other hand, Peter and his group started to arrive at the camp where Aslan lived, and they saw the half-horse, half-human soldiers along with many wild animals. Peter showed him the sword that Father Christmas gave him and asked to meet Aslan. Seeing the sword in Peter's hand, all the soldiers bowed to him, and Aslan came out of the camp. Aslan was not a human hero, as they thought, but a lion, and Peter and his 4 siblings respected the lion. The lion welcomed the 5 of them warmly and asked where Edmund was. Peter was no longer hiding and asked Aslan for help to save their brother as soon as possible because the White Witch had captured their brother. But when they found out that Edmund had betrayed them and joined the witch, the soldiers were reluctant to save Edmund, and it was okay only when the lion intervened. Aslan promised Peter to rescue Edmund from the witch. The next morning, while Susan and Lucy were playing, wolves came and planned to attack them. but Susan blew a magical horn to signal that the enemies were approaching their camp. They then climbed a tree and hid for a while, and the soldiers prepared to attack the two wolves, but Aslan stopped them and let Peter face the wolf alone. Aslan captured one of the two wolves and tasked Peter with killing the other. After Peter fought and defeated the wolf, Aslan released the captured wolf and ordered his soldiers to follow the wolf. Aslan's soldiers followed the wolf and rescued Edmund from the witch. In the morning, Aslan taught Edmund how to live and returned him to Peter. Edmund was very sorry for betraying his siblings and trusting a stranger, and the four of them were very happy as they escaped from the witch. That same day, the White Witch arrived at Aslan's camp, leading her army, and demanded that a traitor like Edmund be returned to her hands. When Aslan refused, the White Witch said that according to Nania's rules, a traitor who betrayed his siblings must be executed at the stone table. Aslan invited the White Witch into the tent for a private consultation, and after an hour's consultation, the witch led her army and left the camp. As night fell, the soldiers and beasts had all fallen asleep, and Aslan left the camp alone, with Lucy and Susan following behind him. Aslan noticed that they were following him and told them not to follow him anymore. But Lucy and Susan didn't listen to what he said and continued to follow Aslan, and soon they began to arrive in the area where the witch and her army were. The witch stood on a stone table holding a sword, while her disciple, a buffalo, slashed Aslan with an axe and fell to the ground. At the witch's order, the soldiers first tied Aslan up and then shaved him bald again, and the hairless Aslan was dragged to the stone table, and finally the witch herself stabbed him to death. The witch and her army were celebrating that they had succeeded in defeating their most powerful enemy and were chanting that they would take possession of Nania by dawn. Lucy and Susan couldn't help but feel sorry for Aslan, who had died, as the two of them reported overnight. Peter and the soldiers who remained at the camp knew that Aslan was dead, and in the morning, Peter himself led a large army and prepared to attack the witch's army that had invaded their territory. The witch entered the battlefield riding a cart pulled by two white bears and ordered her army to kill all of them, leaving no one alive. Just like that, on the battlefield, each side was fighting to the death to win, and on the other side, Susan and Lucy left Aslan's body on the stone table and were preparing to leave the battle arena. But the stone table suddenly cracked, and Aslan's body was nowhere to be found. Moments later, they found Aslan alive and not really dead, and Susan asked what happened, to which Aslan replied that he was not a real traitor and that the stone table couldn't kill him, so it was broken, and Susan and Lucy rode on Aslan's back to the castle where the witch lived. On the other side of the battlefield, Peter's army was unable to match the witch's power and retreated. An old dwarf shot Peter with an arrow, and he fell from his horse. Aslan's disciple, the leader of the army, attacked the enemies and tried to cut the witch's head with his sword, but unfortunately, the witch's magic power turned him into stone. On the other hand, when they arrived at the castle, Aslan used his magic to bring the stone statues back to life, and Lucy's friend, Mr. Tumnus, was able to come back to life. On the other hand, Peter's army couldn't be matched by the witch's power, and Peter had no choice, so he told Edmund to lead his sisters and hurry home. As the witch came close to attacking Peter, Edmund stopped the witch. The witch stabbed Edmund in the chest with her magic weapon, and he fell to the ground. Peter, seeing his brother fall to the ground, became quite angry with the witch and began to fight with his sword as hard as he could. But no matter how hard he tried to attack, he was still no match for the witch's attacks. At that moment, Aslan entered the battlefield with the soldiers who had come back to life from the stone, and the witch was quite shocked to see that Aslan was still alive. The witch, struggling like a dying fox, attacked Peter furiously, and just as she was about to stab Peter to death, Aslan arrived and began to bite her to death. After the White Witch was dead, the battle was over, and Lucy dropped a potion from Father Christmas on the wounded Edmund's mouth, and all of his wounds healed instantly. After defeating the White Witch, Aslan gave Peter, Edmund, Susan, and Lucy the titles of Nania's king and queen in front of all the knights in the palace and returned to the forest where he lived. Just like that, when Peter and his four siblings grew up and went hunting in the forest, they found the lamppost that they had seen in the snowy forest when they were young, and they followed Lucy's lead and came back outside the wardrobe. When they came out of the wardrobe, they became the same age they were when they first entered the wardrobe, and the events that happened to them were like a dream. Professor Diggory Kirk was looking for the four siblings, and he asked what they were doing in the wardrobe, and Peter asked if the professor would believe them if they answered. And that's where the story ends. The remaining 2 episodes will continue to be uploaded on this channel, so if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Thank you all.